Call the August 18, 2020 regular meeting of council to order. Councilperson Dowling will give the invocation this evening.
Heavenly Father, we thank thee for this day. Help us to use good judgment for the business at hand and guide us in wisdom with a continuing sense of truth and fairness for the community we represent.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I found this on the web.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Here.
Mr. Kirchner?
Here.
Mr. Krieger?
Here.
Mr. Landig?
Here.
Mr. Marn?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Donovan?
Here. As you can see, I am not President Landig. President Landig is at home tonight quarantining, but he is with us virtually if you have any questions for him. Good evening. I want to welcome the public to the City Council virtual public meeting. If you are attending through the published WebEx link, you will notice a window open on the bottom right-hand side of the screen entitled Q&A. This window will have open 5 minutes prior to the start of the meeting and will remain open for 10 minutes after the meeting begins, for a total of 15 minutes. During that time, if you wish to address council at a later point in this meeting, please type your name, address, and topic you wish to speak about. This is the only means for you to schedule your participation, since the public cannot physically attend in person at this time. At the appropriate time during the meeting, I will recognize you and you will be unmuted. You will be permitted to make comments to council on the topic you requested to speak about. If the topic is tonight's public hearing, please also type whether you are speaking for or against the topic in order to be recognized in the proper order. If you wish to comment on another item on the agenda, you will be recognized when that item appears on the agenda. All other comments unrelated to the agenda will be heard near the end of the meeting during the persons before council portion. Please make your speaking request at this time, and thank you for virtual participation. Approval of minutes. Council, you received the minutes of the special meeting of July 7th, 2020.
Move to approve. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marn?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. You have also received the minutes of the regular meeting of July 7th, 2020. Julie, please call the roll.
Move to approve. Second.
Oh, sorry about that.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marn?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. The minutes of the July 7th, 2020 special and regular meetings have been approved. Public hearings. We have a public hearing this evening and it will be conducted at 6:00 p.m. as advertised. So we will move on with other items on the agenda until that time. Tabled legislation, we have none. New legislation, ordinance number 20-0-063.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with Dell Inc. for a 3-year Microsoft Enterprise Volume Licensing Agreement under the State of Ohio Cooperative Purchasing Program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flipiak?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This is essentially the city's operating licensing agreement for all PCs within the community of our city employment. As the council's aware, we went to a subscription service a few years back, and we entered into a 3-year agreement then. This is a subsequent 3-year agreement. While the price is for $360,000, $883, it is actually for 1/3 of that annually over that each of those 3-year periods. And we do have Ali Sayan on the line if you wanted to weigh in this or if you had any questions. I will tell you that this pretty much saves us money because the alternative to this, and obviously most organizations of any size have gone into a perpetual licensing agreement of this type, gives automatic updates. It does not require us then to purchase separate software licensing programs and have those installed. and it merges into our entire enterprise network system here in the community. So happy to answer any questions on this.
Council, any questions?
Move to suspend. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Ordinance number 20-0-063 has been approved. Ordinance number 20-0-064.
An ordinance authorizing the city manager to submit construction engineering services documents to the Ohio Department of Transportation and enter into a construction engineering services contract with Quality Control Inspection, Inc. for the LAKSR 615-04.93 resurfacing project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I'll make my comments on this for ordinances 64 and 65. QCI will do the construction services component of this project. The project itself is the resurfacing of State Route 615 from Market to Munson Road. I know that there's been a lot of attention paid to this in recent years, and we've tried to get this bumped up on the list, which I believe our engineering department was successful in doing. It was originally proposed for a later year, but we're really happy to see this going forward. Approximately $452,500 of this will be covered by federal funds through the ODOT Urban Paving Program. And Mr. Swigger is on the line if you'd like to make some comments about the details of the project itself.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. As a condition of using federal funding for construction management services, the city was required to follow a qualification-based selection process, or QBS process, for consultant selection. This involved advertising on the Ohio Department of Transportation's website for these services. In doing so, the city received 4 responses from consultants for construction management services by the July 20th deadline. Based upon the consultant selection rating form provided by ODOT, this office ranked the consultants in the order as listed as 1, Quality Control Inspection, or QCI, DLZ, CT Consultants, and CTL. The ranking took into account the firm's project manager, the strength of experience of the assigned staff, the firm's current workload, consultants' past performance, and the project approach. QCI was selected as the highest ranked firm from the applicants. The city has subsequently received the scope of services and fee document from Quality Control Inspection for review and approval. As part of the QBS process, the city was required to select the consultant based on qualifications and then subsequently agree on a price, negotiate a price. The total estimated fee submitted by QCI for the construction management services is $67,127.90. And that will be billed on an hourly basis and would not be exceeded without prior approval. Approximately $46,300 of the construction engineering inspection costs will be covered by the federal funds through the ODOT Urban Paving Program. A review of the scope of services document and fee estimate provided by QCI has been performed. The scope document addresses all the city's requirements. The estimated construction engineering fee falls within the expected amount for the project of this scope, and QCI possesses the proper experience and qualifications necessary to perform the work for construction engineering services. Thank you.
Council.
Move to suspend. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Ordinance 20-0-064 has been approved. Ordinance number 20-065.
Ordinance authorizing the city manager to award a bid contract to Chagrin Valley Paving for the LAK SR 615-04.93 project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flippia?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The only thing I'll add to my prior comments is that after the cost is calculated for ODOT's contribution, will probably be about a 30% cost back to the city for local funds, which we will be utilizing street funds and TIF funds in order to offset that. Mr. Swigger?
Thank you, Mr. Flippia. Bids were opened on Friday, July 17th for the LAK's SR 615 4.93 resurfacing project, better known as Center Street Resurfacing Project. Project will provide an asphalt overlay from Center Street from Bellflower Road to Munson Road. Bid package consisted of a base bid with no alternates. The 5 bids received for the base bid ranged from a low bid of approximately at $737,023 to a high bid of $836,679.92. It's been determined that Chagrin Valley Paving of Chagrin Falls, Ohio, submitted the lowest bid of $737,023. The engineer's opinion of probable construction cost was $815,000 for the project. A review of the bid from Chagrin Valley Paving indicates it's in conformance with all contract requirements. It's therefore recommended that a contract be awarded to Chagrin Valley Paving, who are experienced and qualified to perform this work, in the amount of $737,023. The final completion date for the project is scheduled for October 15th of 2020.
Council, what is your pleasure?
Move to suspend. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve. Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Ordinance number 20-0-065 has been approved. Ordinance number 20-066.
An ordinance approving the construction of an ADA accessible boardwalk, observation deck, and observation tower at the Manor Lagoons with the assistance of grant funding provided for the submission of this ordinance to the electorate and declaring an emergency.
I think we'll hear from Mr. Filipiak and Mr. Zeman after that.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, member of the council. So the city was very fortunate. I know that working with council, we have tried to put together a somewhat of an interesting and creative project at our Mentor Lagoons, which would involve an ADA accessible boardwalk and in a future phase, observation tower, similar to what you see in some of the metro parks in Lake County. What we're asking council to consider this evening is approval of the 3 phases of the project so that they could be submitted to the electorate for their consideration at the next election in November, and to consider approval of phase 1 and acknowledge that the necessity to utilize the $115,000 and $115,050 grant that was received for that purpose. The grant the total for phase 1, which is approximately 150 feet of the first portion of the boardwalk, which would also include an asphalt section that would come off of the existing trail. And I think that is pretty well highlighted on the map that's attached to your ordinance. That would be phase 1, and that's what the grant applies for. It would be the administration's intent to apply for subsequent grants in order to offset the cost of future phases. Each of those contracts would still come before council for consideration on a phase-by-phase basis.
Thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Mr. Zeman, any comments?
Very little, Mr. President. Members of council, again, this is required pursuant to charter, and I think it's important to perhaps underscore for members of the public who will be voting on this. If approved on November 3rd, the construction that will take place will consist of precisely what's been presented. So a boardwalk, observation deck, observation tower, of course, in subsequent phases, exactly where shown, of the dimensions shown. This is not carte blanche to do any other construction activities at the lagoons and marina. And I think that's again, important to underscore that fact. If any changes, substantial changes were to be made, that would require a new referendum under the current construction of the charter.
Thank you, Mr. Zeman. Council, what is your pleasure?
Vice President Donovan, I have a question for the
Ms. Donovan.
administration. Looking at the map, when it shows the phase one, it shows the diagonal lines, but then leading up to it, it looks like we are just going to go from the existing trail over to that to join it. That will be just like the other trails in the preserve. Not quite sure I'm following the map. Do you see what I'm talking about? When you go off the existing trail and then you make that right-hand turn, it says new trail ADA accessible. But below that, it says phase one ADA with the vertical. So I just wanted to get clarification.
Yes, thank you, Councilwoman Dowling. That's an excellent question. The administration, in looking at the layout here, that's a grassy area that would lend itself to a hard surface covering to keep it ADA compliant, which is what we have on the main trail there as you come into the preserve. As we get into the sensitive area, that's where the boardwalk would be placed, because that's actually going to sit up on piers so that the landscape is relatively unchanged underneath. So the other advantage that has is that portion, I want to say it's about 50 feet. That should be a little bit cheaper to install. And as a result, we'll have more monies available to work on the sort of observation deck that ultimately is going to front the marsh.
So that is actually part of phase one. That's not something we're doing separately and isn't included in phase one? Or?
No, it would be in phase one.
Okay.
That's actually something that would likely be done. We could do in-house too. That's part of our in-kind contribution to the grant. So,
Thank you.
Back to you, Council. What's your pleasure?
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Before I cast my vote, and that is that with the grant of $115,050 and making this ADA accessible, I hope the voters recognize that fact that if it is voted down, we lose that money and we lose the ADA compliant boardwalk. So my answer is yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Ordinance number 20-066 has been approved. Ordinance number 20-067.
An ordinance providing for the submission of the electorate of amendment to section 3.09A of the Charter of Mentor and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak.
We'll defer to
Mr. Zeman.
Yes, thank you. Members of council, this is a purpose of the ordinance would place this proposed charter amendment on the general election ballot for November 3rd. Its primary focus is to differentiate between what is now lumped together under section 3.9 of the charter, that being the Manor Marina and the nature preserve. As everyone is aware, the challenges of running the commercial marina, a man-made marina, it can be daunting, and particularly with some of the older infrastructure, which requires either replacement or some types of improvements, augmentation, and other types of just aspects of running a commercial enterprise, which is dramatically different from preservation of natural areas. Right now under the charter, it's all lumped together, and that of course has caused some issues relative to obtaining funding sources, obtaining additional revenue streams, something as simple as adding additional dock space and taking advantage of additional area to bring in more boaters. That requires a referendum. Nothing inherently wrong with that. However, obviously the practical issues of that, not being able to run that facility the way every other single park and other mentor facility is run, does cause a lot of practical issues that have been discussed, I think, numerous times publicly by not just this council, but members of the administration. So this tries to strike the balance between being able to manage a marina as an ongoing commercial enterprise and being able to make marina-related improvements such as additional docks, replacements of aging infrastructure with new and state-of-the-art facilities, and the preservation of the natural areas such that they remain in that state unless such time as they may be approved by the voters. So this was very, very narrowly defeated at the last time it was appeared on the ballot. A few changes have been made, I think, for clarification purposes, so that those persons who may have felt that it wasn't adequately addressed hopefully have had those concerns addressed in this. And so we think it's a lot clearer now that no development occurs at the marina, which is not marina related, that there's no sale or lease of any of the marina without voter approval, that there's no residential or commercial, industrial development of any nature whatsoever at the marina without voter approval. And then the prohibitions relative to the nature preserve are really fairly absolute. Nothing's been changed from the current language where any development, any disturbing of the natural areas in there, anything of that nature would require voter approval. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer any further questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Zeman. Mr. Flipiak, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice President, members of council. I just want to, applaud council's efforts to really clean this up. And we're looking at something that I think has been talked about for a lot of years, and I think Mr. Zeman said it very well. There are some practical needs when you're essentially managing what is a business out there at our Mentor Marina. And that can be anything from the need to, you'd mentioned additional docks, whether floating docks or improving those to expand our ability to serve additional boaters. It can include things like electrical upgrades, which has been very lacking out there in past years, maintenance services to the boaters that we currently can't provide that are in high demand. But I think it also does a really good job of restating council and the community's commitment to preserving in perpetuity the nature preserve itself. So creating that clear separation and that restatement of the commitment of this community and this council's had, I think makes that clear and helps us operate a lot more efficiently out there. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. Mr. Kirchner.
Yeah, Mr. Flipiak actually mentioned what I was going to say. Preserve, so there's no confusion. The preserve will stay a preserve in perpetuity, period.
Thank you. Mr. Krieger.
Just want to comment, based on what the city manager said. The community in the past and to the present has always trusted the city to handle these parks. For example, I would consider Springbrook more along the line of the preserve. Had no complaints about that. As far as marina, our city handles Wildwood, Garfield, and Manor Beach Park as far as we rent those facilities out to the public, maintain those facilities without having to go for permission. I'm just saying, I think we've had no complaints on it past on this. I don't see a difference for what we were asking here. Dunes in the preserve.
Vice President? Go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay, just one point, and I think sometimes we forget it. We compete with other marinas. They are commercial marinas, and they are not restricted in this way. And so many times, if we have an issue, a breach or something, we have to deal with so much more than another marina would. And I think the last 5.5 months, everyone has really come to appreciate not just our marina, but all of our parks. They've been utilized more than I have ever seen them before. I think the ADA boardwalk, I think that's long overdue and couldn't be more thrilled. But I also think that this just has to happen. We can't continue to operate a marina if we can't be competitive. It's been a number of years since I worked up the numbers about the difference between passive and active income, and we have very little passive income. We have dockage and storage, and that's it. Other marinas bring in from all kinds of other sources. We don't have the ability to do that. We can't continue to compete if we have our hands tied. I think the city, past councils, I think they've paid their dues. I think they've earned the trust. And I really hope that the residents, and I appreciate Mr. Zeman clarifying the fact it cannot be sold in spite of how anyone decides to interpret that. It's on the record, and I couldn't be more pleased to see this come forward. Thank you.
Councilperson Dolly. Mr. Marr?
Basically, it comes down to three things. One, we're doing this so that we could take and accept the free money instead of giving it back or giving it away. Number two, to run the marina like a business and enhance the marina and nature preserve. And number three, to protect the marina and to protect.
Mr. Vice
Thank you,
President.
Mr. Martin. Mr. Flipiak?
Just if I could just pick up on a comment that Mrs. Dowling said, because I think a fantastic point. Just to follow up on that, our inability to be competitive means that because we have made a commitment to maintaining and keeping the marina open, that the less revenue we're able to generate because of our lack of competitiveness means that the general fund and the residents of Mentor who never use that will have to subsidize it. So this is important for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. Council, what is your pleasure? Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Ordinance number 20-067 has been approved. We're getting close to 6 o'clock. We'll try one more resolution. Resolution number 20-R-118.
A resolution declaring estimated assessments for the construction of certain sidewalks in zones 1B and 1C associated with the 2019 Pedestrian Safety Program in the city of Manor, ratifying and confirming publications and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Malinowski, please. He's not here somewhere. Well, he was. We lost him. Okay. Well, these are the final assessments that have been presented in the attachment for zones 1B and 1C. Council, the final assessed cost in total was $85,026, and that was distributed among 471 parcels, and plus, of course, administrative costs associated with that.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
If I could just make one comment, I think that the city is really getting to the point of perfection on this, because this was in my ward this year, and I did not receive a single complaint, a single challenge, or a single question. This seems to have just gone really smooth. I applaud the city on making this work so well. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Blake.
Vice President Donovan.
Dolly.
Quick question, and I know it varies. Do we have an estimate on approximately what it costs per slab per resident? I have a very distinct reason for asking that. There
Sure.
was some post up on Facebook stating that the city told them it was $1,000 a slab, and I know that that is not the case. So I'd like to get it on the record.
Yeah. Yes. No. It's not quite that. Mr. Swigger, do you have an estimate on this phase?
Yes, the cost is about $175 a slab. For as construction cost is there, as was mentioned, there are administrative fees that are added to all properties that are involved with the assessment. But construction cost is about $175 a slab. It's about $7 per square foot.
Thank you, Mr. Swigger.
And the
that is state-
administrative
And that is
fees are
state
not assessed per slab, they're assessed per property.
per property, correct?
Okay.
And I believe
Thank
that's
you.
around $29 in this particular phase per property.
Thank you. I'll just say it makes the city really nice and cleans it up very well. Thank you. Council, what's your pleasure?
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner? Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Hirschner? Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Resolution number 20-R-118 has been adopted. We are going to move on to our public hearing at this time. This public hearing is being held pursuant to notice duly republished and posted according to the law. Ordinance number 20-0-062.
An ordinance amending the codified ordinances of the City of Manor 2006 as amended, repealing section 1155.01G, the RVG Village Green zoning district, and any related code sections.
Mr. Filipiak and Mr. Zeman probably after that, or you want Mr. Zeman to go first?
I'm going to take the lead on this, Mr. Zeman. I was going to ask Mrs. Mitchell at some point to discuss what happened at Planning Commission or answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Yes, Council. You'll recall that by resolution 20-R-116, the Council referred to the Municipal Planning Commission a request for a recommendation regarding the continued viability of the RVG district moving forward. The Planning Commission did make a recommendation, affirmative recommendation by 6-1 vote, recommending that it be eliminated from the zoning code. I'll allow their minutes of that meeting to speak for itself. I think they tended to echo some of Council's sentiment that the current PD overlay regulations may represent better planning policy moving forward. Obviously, that's one of the factors for the Council to consider in its judgment tonight. I did get a question that often comes up, what does that mean to current RVG zone properties? This does not work a rezoning of any land in the city. It's simply an elimination of this district from the regulations moving forward. So that properties now zoned RVG remain zoned RVG. As the Council is aware, all RVGs are rezoned pursuant to a development plan. Those development plans continue in full force and effect into the future. There are also additional supplemental regulations for sign control, accessory structures, and things of that nature. Those will remain in the code relative to the references to RVG and all of those things moving forward. So if there's no further questions, that would conclude my comments.
Filipiak?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice President. I don't have a lot to add to that. I would simply say that I think Council did a very good job of with the adoption of the Planned Residential Development Overlay District, the Planned Development Overlay District that has several different manifestations that can fit what we believe anything that would otherwise have been covered under RVG, and of course a whole lot of other different types of developments that provide some higher standards that I think Council was after and the Planning Commission was after. Planning Director Mitchell is here and can answer any questions. I think she did a pretty good job of providing Council with a side-by-side comparison of how RVG matches up with the PD overlay regulations that were adopted earlier, I think at the end of last year. And she's on here to answer any questions you might have.
Mrs. Mitchell, any comments? You guys,
No, I think both Mr. Filipiak and Mr. Zeman covered everything. I am happy to answer any questions. We did take a look at both districts at the Planning Commission level, and we also provided both boards with the list of current existing RVG developments. There's a total of 29, which includes those in process, and also the map indicating where all those are located. So if you have any further questions, I'm happy to try and answer those.
Is there anyone in favor? Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of this item? I guess we have someone on, correct, Julie? Mr. Brad Proley from Pulte Homes. Are you with us? Brad, are you with us from Pulte Homes? I don't hear him.
Mr. Chairman, Jim O'Connor's there, but he's been muted. If he can be unmuted.
Okay, let's go to Jim O'Connor.
Can you hear me now?
Mr. O'Connor, are you there? Is this Brad or Jim? We can't hear you, Jim or Brad, at this point.
How about now? Testing.
Is this Brad or is this Jim?
This is Jim.
Jim, we hear you. Yes, we do hear you every once in a while.
Okay. How about now? Is this working? I seem to have a connection now.
That is working. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jim.
I apologize for the technical difficulty. I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity to speak. And we were not necessarily speaking either for or against as much as speaking and just requesting additional clarity. The law director made a comment a little bit earlier. Our concern was obviously after having approved the Brookview Reserve subdivision, and we haven't started construction yet. We had a slight delay as a result of the pandemic. But we plan and hope to get this under construction as quickly as possible. So we wanted to make sure that the approvals and the legislative action that had already occurred would still remain intact and in effect for the balance of the project as we have it approved. And that was the only clarification and assurance that we were looking for. And I believe the law director has confirmed that. We've had a conversation about that. So I just wanted to reiterate that point.
Thank you, Jim. Jim, can you state your whole name and address for the record?
Yes, it's Jim O'Connor, Director of Planning with Pulte Homes, 387 Medina Road, Medina, Ohio, 44256.
Thank you, Jim. Is that all you have?
That is all I have, yes.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Anyone speaking against? I don't see anyone speaking against. Council is in receipt of all correspondence and emails received pertaining to this matter. This public hearing is adjourned. Say it again. The council is in receipt? Is that, or the ordinance? Yeah. Okay. And the same item remaining under new business, ordinance number 20-0-062.
An ordinance amending the codified ordinances of the City of Manor 2006 as amended, repealing section 1155.01G, the RVG Village Green zoning district, and any related code sections.
Council? Mr. Martin.
As
yeah, you got to turn around.
I was there.
it's like a worst seat in the house.
You talk, we can sit.
As everyone is aware, Mr. Kircher and myself, we asked this to be sent back to planning to get their comments and concerns. Part of the reasoning why I asked that, if I wanted to see if anyone would have any solutions on how that we could change or alter RVG to 2020 standards from 1977 standards. And as we all know, when we talked about before with PD, plan development, is that we've been working on that for a number of years. And it's really where we need to be and would supersede RVG. RVG, as we know, my attestation about history is that, we kind of dusted it off again because we had these little parcels of property that we needed something to fit. For example, let's call it the Rice property, which we passed. It would be physically impossible to put half-acre lots down there, typical streets fit on that property, so passed. We've had two other instances that didn't pass, whether it felt that there were too many homes, lot size, home size, just overall development, how it would work with the adjacent neighborhoods. As Jim, who just spoke from Pulte Homes, a property off of 84, which was 60, right? 60, 70, about
73 acres.
70, okay, 73 acres. As we know, that would have been probably a perfect place for our first stab at our planned development. But with the planned development, the problem with that is that everything has to go to referendum and the vote of the people. So that's a major reason why that people tend to gravitate towards the RVG because it doesn't. And as what my main concern is that we would really hurt / slaughter economic development, and especially being in 2020 with viruses, protests, elections, and everything of that nature that we've all been going through. I mean, Jan, I'm sure you're having a hard time getting parts in your business. I had a hard time getting tires for my car. So the supply chain's really been disrupted. So that's the major concern. So in discussing with Mr. Flipiak, Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Zampedro, Mr. Malachek, and John and Bruce and people of council, is that the planned development is really the way of the future, and that's why we've been working on it so hard, but the problem is the referendum. So moving forward, what I'd like to take a look at is discussing the referendum and placing that on the ballot so that council and administration would have more flexibility. In the meantime, because my biggest concern, and that's the email I sent out and the text to everybody, is the economic development factor, is that if we were to just take it off the books right now, then we would have nothing. And that would further stall the areas that we need to develop or redevelop until when council decides should pass referendum, and the people would ultimately decide. So the two areas that were passed this year with high marks were, of course, Rice, because it fit, and everyone was comfortable with it. And the other area, of course, was with Jim and Pulte. When Jim and I and Pulte, we discussed everything, and with the types of homes they're building there, and as everyone remember, there was about an 80-page packet / email, and the whole goal of that was that what we put together was that I kept on saying, here's where, and we took time driving around Manor, here's where we hit a home run, and here's where we maybe hit a double, and here's where we maybe hit a single, and here's where we probably struck out. So the whole goal was to not only sell it to council, but sell it to the administration, but to sell it to the people of Manor, because the people that are looking to buy homes. So what I'm saying is that let's discuss about going for referendum, number one. Number two, in the future, till we decide exactly what we're doing with the referendum, is that we would decide, and to the vote of the people, that we put additional restrictions on the RVG, like we did with the Pulte project, so that everyone knows exactly what the layout is, what the lot size is, how the houses will look, and go from there. Because my biggest concern is, of course, economic development. So I talked with Mr. Krieger, Mr. Zampedro, Mr. Flipiak. Today we had a meeting, and they like that idea with the flexibility going forward. But I guess what I'm asking you and Bruce at home is that we have, work sessions here relatively soon on the referendum portion of this. And Mr. Zeman, I'm going to ask you to do a little homework. If you could check other communities in Lake County that are set up like us, because quite frankly, I don't know of another community set up like us, and see how they work with different type of zoning issues. That's probably too much, but
no, thank you, Mr. Marr.
That's everything that we're trying to put together here for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah. Any other comments? Council, what's your pleasure? Mr. Kirchner.
I continue to disagree that RVG is salvageable in any form at this point. I think the Planning Commission's made that clear. The lawsuits that we're under have made it clear that regardless of what we do, even if it's something that's approved with new additions to building styles and whatnot, I still think the Planning Commission and Council are going to probably have issues. Goes through the Planning Commission 6-1-7-0. It has to be a supermajority here. We've gone through this process a couple of times already. I just think, if I agree that referendum's the way to go to try to get it off the books and put it on the Planning Commission and Council's lap, but you could do that as early as May. I don't foresee any emergency where we have to rush to upscale or address the RVG in the meantime. It's just get rid of it and go forward in May. If you want to put the new and improved section in play, then go to the voters and ask them to make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Kirchner. Mr. Blake.
I agree with what Mr. says. I think RVG, in my estimation, has looked at this for the last couple of years. Back in the 70s, it started at one place.
Can't hear you.
And now today, we've got a whole different animal. I've got one of the newer RVGs right across the street from me. And I know that the houses are popular and they're selling, but two of the houses just put decks on the back of their house, and there is a 15-foot separation between those two. I think that what people want today may not be what they want tomorrow. Myself, I still can't wrap my head around that people want that sort of density of living so close together. What RVG has become is in my estimation, you have R4 homes put on 6,000 square foot lots, and people are too close together. So I support doing away with RVG right now, replacing it with our RPD that Kathy and the administrations worked so hard to develop. I think it will bring us a diversity of housing types, which present day RVG, like I just mentioned, it's R4 houses on ultra small lots. And I think to have this sort of density, we need to have a device that gives us that different housing styles. And that's what I see coming forward in the RPD. So, and I'm excited to see that come forward. But if we only have RVG, that's the only thing that the developers are going to pick up, in my estimation, and that's what we're going to get from here on.
Thank you, Mr. Blake.
Mrs. Dollar.
Just Sean kind of took my comment at the end when we talk about, and I don't think we can deny that the RVGs have been selling. But if that's the only thing, people want to live in Manor. They want to live in Manor for a multitude of reasons, the schools, our facilities, the parks. And if all you are offering is RVG, that is what they are going to buy. It may not be their ideal, and maybe it is, and for some people it's perfect. But I don't think we have any shortage of RVG developments for residents and future residents to move into. So I think it is time. Comment just what Scott said. I mean, we've been looking at alternatives, and I think it's time to pull the plug. So, thank you.
Mrs. Dowling. Mr. Martin?
You brought up a good point. Say hypothetically, Mr. Zeman, that put on a November ballot. Well, if anyone was to submit for property before November, it all agreed to be in the process, correct? So no matter what happens in November.
What?
Okay, so say they're through the process in the city, right? And let's just say that we put it on so we do away with the RVG, like we've all been talking about, because we all want PD in one form or another, but we're concerned about the economic development. Okay. So let's say a person's in the process, and then the voters say yes. Now RVG is stricken from our charter. What happens to anybody that's in the process?
Okay, well, to remove the RVG district will not require a referendum.
No,
so
we don't have to
that
vote.
council's action tonight, if it acts tonight, will be final in that regard. With respect to any approved projects or any projects like obviously Mr. O'Connor from Pulte was concerned about its effect on that project since they haven't broken ground yet. Their right to develop under RVG is already vested. Legislation has already been passed. And
No, I'm saying in terms of the referendum. I apologize. I misspoke. In terms of the referendum, if we put it on for the referendum for the PD.
Oh, I see.
Because right now, if we restrict our RVG, all right? The only way that someone could develop something is by current zoning, okay? So whatever it is, R10, R4, R2, whatever it is, okay? And then it goes to referendum, and then with referendum, it's approved or disapproved. You know what I'm saying? Because someone's going to develop property right now, or is that it'll take a full year, because by the time that they submit plans to the administration, they work with the administration, and they go through planning, and they go through us, and then there's only 2 elections a year. See where I'm getting at? So that's going to be a full year. So right there, the average organization for, let's say, 30, 40 homes or whatever it is, not going to wait an entire year. Now, if you have 70 acres of property, which we're running out of the larger lots, it may be worth to wait that entire year to be able to get this done. So how would someone in the process with the hopes that this may change or may not change with the referendum for PD?
In my experience, and working in the private sector, most developers will take, when they're looking at potential project, potential acquisition of property, and thinking about what will the market bear relative to what they're going to construct. They took a look at all of those things, and the vagaries of the community's approval process is obviously one of those things. There are certainly developers out there who just don't want to mess with mandatory referendums. They'll just go, somewhere else. On the other hand, if that's the cost of market entry and they feel as though they're going to get a significant return on their investment if it's approved, there's things they can do to mitigate some of these potential stranded costs if the referendum should fail. They'll put off on going to technical plans and things of that nature as much as possible. In my experience, I think what you're striking upon is that level of delay. It could be several months delay before they get on for the ballot for a referendum and find out whether or not the rezoning will ultimately be approved. Is that something which is so significant that it'll just automatically cause every potential developer to not be interested? And the answer in my experience would be no, for a few reasons. One, even without a mandatory referendum, some communities take forever to go through their process. They just do. It's really some communities are absolutely Byzantine relative to how you get approval for things. Architectural review boards, planning commission review boards, there's equity boards of review. I mean, there's everything that you can possibly imagine. The layers are pretty significant. Many communities will automatically put things on for 3 readings, for example. I think that generally, from start to finish, Mentor does an exceptional job in getting to that final decision point. And yes, a mandatory referendum will cause several months delay, at least, probably, in that process. But I really think that will, at the end of that will still stack up pretty favorably with some of the amount of time it takes other communities to review these proposals, even when there is no mandatory referendum for rezoning.
Mr. Krieger.
Question for the director. Vote this down tonight.
That's correct.
I'm talking to the mic.
So we vote this down tonight. This will be taken out of our zoning classification without the vote of the people. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So in the same light, if we vote this down and we want to change, add a zoning classification to include, to try and enhance our development in the city of Manor for mixed use, higher end condos, higher end apartments, we also conform that zoning classification without the vote of the people. Is that correct?
Yes, the code can be amended without referendum.
Okay. I want to make that clear.
Council?
Vice President.
Pardon me, who is that?
It's me, Mr. Vice President.
Oh, hi, Mr. President. You were quiet. I didn't hear you out there.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment to Mr. Marne's point. This will have a negative effect on economic development in the residential sector that has become really an RVG type development. However, maybe it is time for a plebiscite whether it's an individual property that is taken to the people for a vote, or if we go back at some time in the future and do referendum on land development, residential PUD type zoning to take that authority back for council's decision if the people would support that. But until we know more about what the people of Manor really want, I think this relatively minor aspect of economic development, it won't be that long till we really find out by a vote of the people what they want.
Thank you, Mr. Landig. Council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Ordinance number 20-065 has been approved.
We are going to talk about the referendum.
Yeah, well,
Promise me.
I just said, I'm Mr.
holding you to it.
This is a question for the law director. And Bruce made a good point, you know, to
I
get
did
the
cut it.
confidence of the voters to see if they're willing to give control to the planning commission and council for the new and improved version of the plan development. And when would be the earliest? Would it be the primary season? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Mr. Marne, did you have a question?
Mr. San Pedro and I are talking today. By 60 days before an election, or we go by 75?
The charter will allow for amendments for 60 days prior to the election. We are running up against some hard deadlines, though. September 18th, I believe, is the hard deadline for the overseas ballots. So the ballots have to be printed by then. So realistically, after tonight, it would be extremely hard pressed to get anything on the November ballot, but not impossible.
One comment from me. I think Joe's description of our city compared to other cities with the referendum, he basically told me and us that we can actually do it in the same amount of time with the referendum or quicker. And that's very positive to me. And I'm glad you said that.
Well, again, just to clarify, part of that may depend on the timing of the applications.
Yeah.
Obviously, there may be an approval that's granted, by the council for a rezoning in late May, and so it's going to have to wait until November. But if developers time their proposals correctly, I have confidence that the city has always moved very, very quickly. And frankly, I think the Bolton is a prime example of that. A very, very detailed project, and special meetings were called. The city was very sensitive to the time constraints and the amount of investment that was taking place in that plan in order to get on the ballot at the last election. So I think that really underscores just how responsive the city can be to those types of proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Zeman. Anyone else?
Vice President?
Dolly?
Just over the last year, doing a lot of research and looking at old council minutes from old council meetings from back in the 70s and the 80s and how we got to where we're at. And I see both sides of the issue. I always have. And the one thing, and like I said, I agree, a work session, I would like to have discussion about this, but I don't think it's detrimental that it was detrimental to do this now. I think we've got time. But I did read some of the comments from some of our founding fathers back in the early days, and they did have comments about the amount of time that a member of the Planning Commission and a member of council invest and spends at looking at these projects before we would vote to approve them.
Great idea.
And it's, and it is a factor. And his point, and I won't mention names, but it was like, is the average resident willing to put that much time and research into a project so they can make a decision with the same level. So I think that's something we need to decide going forward, and I just think we'll see what will happen.
Thank you. We are going to move back to our agenda. Resolution number 20-R-119.
A resolution declaring the necessity of repairing and reconstructing certain sidewalks in Zone 2A associated with the 2020 Pedestrian Safety Program in the City of Manor, requiring that abutting property owners repair same, ratifying and confirming notices, authorizing repair or construction of said sidewalks by the city engineer, and in certain cases, providing for assessment of cost and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Flipiak, any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and I'm sure you're happy that we're back in your ward.
I am.
This is the first step of our moving forward with our pedestrian safety program, in this case, Zone 2A. Mr. Swigger, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Filipiak. Between July and August of this year, the city completed sidewalk inspections in Zone 2A of Ward 2, and that's an area bounded by Manor Avenue, I-90, Garfield Road, and Little Mountain Road. A total of 453 out of 1,137 parcels were found to have deficient sidewalks. 1,570 sidewalk slabs were found to have deficiencies requiring repair or new construction. Of this total, the city will be replacing 321 slabs adjacent to existing street trees or storm sewer manholes. Additionally, the city will be reconstructing 63 handicap ramps at intersections. Homeowners will be responsible for the remainder of 1,249 slabs to be replaced or repaired. The legislation is a resolution of necessity, which declares that it is necessary to repair the sidewalk deficiencies identified in Exhibit A in accordance with Section 729 of the Ohio Revised Code and Section 913 of the Manor Municipal Code. Upon council approval of this resolution, property owners will be notified and given until May 31st of 2021 to make the repairs. Repairs not made by May 31st of 2021 will then be made by the city's sidewalk contractor, with the cost being assessed back to the property owner. The engineering department will keep you updated as the program proceeds. I did want to note that we'll be hosting a virtual public meeting in September to answer any questions residents have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swigger. Council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Resolution number 20-R-119 has been adopted. Resolution number 20-R-120.
A resolution declaring the official intent and reasonable expectation of the City of Manor on behalf of the State of Ohio, the borrower, to reimburse its general fund for the Hopkins Road resurfacing CG26X with the proceeds of tax-exempt debt of the State of Ohio and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Filipiak, an explanation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice President, members of council. So this is a bit of a new step for us. These are around 34 OPWC grants that have been approved. Council has already approved legislation allowing us to apply, and we have received contracts and award letters and contracts for these projects. What these next three resolutions, including 120, 121, and 122, relate to each of the three projects that the city has been approved for in round 34. Let me first say that we're glad to be able to move forward with these projects. They were put on hold because of some of the concerns with the state budget, and then they were subsequently approved by the Ohio legislature to allow round 34 projects to be funded. So what this essentially, each of these says is that any costs associated with the projects that we would expend out of our general fund would be reimbursed to the general fund through OPWC grant and or loan dollars. So that typically would include, could include virtually any cost component of the project. Typically, they are professional service costs, which are generally paid for by the city and then reimbursed down the road. We have not been asked to do this in the past. we are in this case. So I think this will be the standard operating procedure moving forward. So with respect to Resolution 120, this applies to the Hopkins Road resurfacing project. The city has been awarded a $199,900 grant and an $80,100 loan for that project. And the project total cost is expected to be around $970,000.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. Council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Good work, Ken. Thank you. Resolution number 20-R-120 has been adopted. Let's see, where are we? That's the wrong number, right? No.
121.
Resolution number 20-R-121.
Resolution declaring the official intent and reasonable expectation of the city of Manor on behalf of the state of Ohio, the borrower, to reimburse its general fund for the Lake Overlook Drive reconstruction CG 54X with the proceeds of tax-exempt debt of the state of Ohio and declaring an emergency.
Flipiak, same.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Again, this is for the complete restoration of Lake Overlook Drive, which is a $1.3 million project. City received $500,000 in grant and a $150,000 loan.
Pardon me, what ward and what, how much money?
That would be Ward 4. Yes.
Okay.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Ms. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Resolution number 20-R-121 has been adopted. Resolution number 20-R-122.
A resolution declaring the official intent and reasonable expectation of the city of Manor on behalf of the state of Ohio, the borrower, to reimburse its general fund for the Dartmoor Road / Stockbridge Road drainage improvements, CG 32X, with the proceeds of tax-exempt debt of the state of Ohio and declaring an emergency.
For Flipiak, you want to say it again?
You should like this one a little bit
You want to say
better.
it again? I'd just like to hear you talk. Council, what's your pleasure?
Move to suspend.
Second.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes. Vice President, what ward is that again?
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Where are we?
Move to approve.
Second.
There you go. Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Resolution number 20-R-122 has been adopted. Second readings, we have none. Third readings, we have none. We get to hear Mr. Flipiak talk again, manager's report.
Thank you, Council, Mr. Vice President. We do have two open cut requests for Council's consideration. The first is from Aqua, Ohio for a new water service line under the pavement at 7418 Chillicothe Road. And this is a new home and the main is under the pavement. So there really is no other option for us in this particular instance.
Council?
Move to approve.
Second.
Julie?
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Thank you, Council. And the next is a pavement open cut request from Aqua, Ohio to disconnect an abandoned water service line under the pavement at 8807 Manor Avenue, which is the former 50s diner. And this is being done as part of the project for the new service that's being installed for the tire shop that's under construction currently. Our engineering department has worked very closely with Aqua on this. We have attempted to determine whether or not this is a necessity right now, because our in accordance with council's desire to try to avoid as many of these open cuts as possible. They're pretty insistent on this, and I don't know if Mr. Swigger, you want to speak to this? Still on the line?
Yes, Mr. Filipiak. We have worked with Aqua on this for months. One thing that we were able to do is to avoid the original open cut that was approved by City Council in June of 2019 to connect the fire line to the water main. So the location of the water main allowed us to make that tap without cutting, or allow Aqua to make the tap without cutting into the pavement. So we're able to avoid that one. This is one they're very concerned about due to the age of the service line. It's a 1.5 inch service line. It's under pressure. It's under the road. In their opinion, it's bound to leak, or it's bound to be hit at some point in the future. We did contact the Lake County Department of Utilities to see what their opinion was in this situation, and their policy would be to also cut the line at the main, similar to what Aqua is requesting. So it's one of those things. If you leave the line under the roadway under pressure, it's most likely going to leak, and it has a chance of possibly being damaged in the future, which could impact businesses in the vicinity if that were to take place. So in this case, we support them making this cut and disconnecting the line.
Council?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a pavement open cut, Jelena Construction. Oh, Julie, call the roll, I'm sorry.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
Mr. Blake, after the morning after our last council meeting, when you asked the question about that particular building, they started.
I know. And it looks large.
It
really
looks tall,
looks
yeah.
large. There's
Very
only
next morning, they were out there.
one wall up,
Yeah.
and it's,
Like, man, you do a lot of magic then. That's good.
that wasn't me.
Mr. Flipiak.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And there was a third open pavement request from Jelena Construction at 7418 Hart Street. I think it was at the President of Council's recommendation that we look at the potential for these two structures that would be
I
served
did
by
request that. Yes.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
My apologies.
What it is?
And to suggest a dry wells for those. They've agreed to that, and so
Okay.
this request is no longer
Oh, great.
before you.
That's fantastic. There you go, Bruce. No open cut there.
Very good. So moving on to other business. The Manor Police Department will be participating in the upcoming Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign. The national mobilization begins August 19th and will continue through September 7th. During this time, officers will be especially vigilant in their efforts to stop and arrest drivers who are impaired by alcohol and/or drugs. The goal is to prevent traffic crashes related to drug or alcohol impaired drivers and to keep the roadways safe for our residents. Very pleased to say the Tyler Boulevard resurfacing project is substantially complete. The punch list items are being corrected as we speak, and schedule for a final inspection with ODOT will be happening very soon. City of Mentor's logo and city name have been installed on each side of the fencing at State Route 306 bridge over State Route 2. Looks fantastic if you've had a chance to drive under that. And the contractor's construction work on the bridge is also complete. So there's minor restoration there, but overall the project has turned out pretty good. Civic Center pool is now closed for the season. Saturday, August 15th was the last day of operation. We did put a new boiler system in there this year in the spring, and that worked out very well. And I think it's fair to say that attendance was way down this year, but those who did use it among our residents were very appreciative of the fact that they had some outlet this year. After 37 years, we are in the process of finally installing the new bleacher system at the Manor Ice Arena, and we'll be able to increase capacity from 600 to 700 spectators as a result of that. That work should be finished up in about 3 weeks, and when we get back to normal, I think we'll be able to take advantage of that. There are only 6 Fridays remaining for the Menor's Farmers Market at Garfield Park. The market runs from 2 to 6 p.m., with the first hour being reserved for senior citizens and at-risk individuals. And then finally, Council, a few new businesses to announce. Sunset Industries at 7564 Tyler Boulevard. The Brew Kettle is now open at 7850 Manor Avenue. Crazy Bins at 7721 Manor Avenue. And today we were actually very pleased to be able to attend the groundbreaking for the Buyers Product Distribution Center. That's a 300,000 square foot addition. And we're really pleased with their continued investment here. And also, Mr. Malachek joined Representative Joyce and our Ohio Secretary of State, as well as Senator Eklund at RB Sigma today, who was being given some congratulations for donating 462,000 masks for all election workers in Ohio. So again, it's great to see mentor businesses making their mark across the state. So for all of these new businesses and those who are continuing to do the good work that they do in our community, we appreciate their investment and we wish them great success going forward. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. If anybody's driven by Crazy Bins, you won't believe it. The parking lot's full.
Really?
Yes. It's incredible. Clerk's correspondence.
Council's in receipt of the Manor Municipal June 2020 month-end report.
Commission committee reports. Council, you are in possession of the Community Arts Commission, May 7, 2020 and June 4th, 2020. Board of Building and Zoning Appeals, June 9th, 2020 and July 14th, 2020. Municipal Planning Commission, June 18th, 2020. Old business. We have none. New business.
Mr. Donovan?
Mr. Kirschner.
I just wanted to comment on, a number of months ago, I had requested that we get in touch with the representative of the developer who is doing the 615 retail center. And, that was rezoned a number of years ago. And personally, I was a little concerned about the progress, and I wanted to get an update on how things were going. Subsequently, about a month ago, I noticed that one of the buildings, the out parcels that were not available back then are now available. One is for lease and one is for sale. Thought maybe back when we had those discussions and that was first brought up that they were going to pursue those properties to continue to enhance that, what we were led to believe were upscale retail. I think there was going to be a large fitness center at one time and an 80-some thousand square foot grocery store and some others. So anyways, I did request again the other day that we do get in touch with that representative, who, by the way, hasn't returned the call from a few months ago. But I'm not sure if that representative got back to give us an update or not. But hopefully when he does, the administration can share what he has to say as far as the progress of that development. Important to note that we put in, through our TIF funding, I believe, well over $1 million in improvements to make that happen. And so far, we lost Mold Masters and we lost the roofing company, and we vacated a road for them. And I know that given the brick and mortar issues that they brought up in the pandemic, however, I do see other communities, there is retail and commercial going in other communities, but hopefully we might get an answer to what their future plans are. Those buildings that are for lease and for sale are rather old and outdated buildings, and I don't think it really lends itself to what we were hoping to have there as far as the upscale retail and commercial area. But I understand where we are with the economy, but I would hope at least they get back to us and give us some kind of an explanation of where they're looking to go.
Thank you, Mr. Kirschner. Any comments on that?
Well, of course, we can't speak on behalf of the developer, but as recently as today, I personally reached out to a representative of that developer and haven't received a response yet today. So as soon as we do, we will give council an update. And I think Mr. Kirchner's observations are spot on. I mean, there is an opportunity there, it would seem, maybe enhance their development with the acquisition of those properties. I don't know if there's any intent there or not, but we can certainly ask and bring council up to date.
Thank you, Mr. Flipiak. Next thing, on the subject of a recommendation to the commissioners for the Lake County Port and Economic Development Authority, does council have any recommendations in mind?
Mr. Donovan, I would like to recommend that we put the name of Mr. Jim Struna for reappointment to that position.
Julie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dowling?
Yes.
Mr. Kirchner?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger?
Yes.
Mr. Landig?
Yes.
Mr. Marne?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes. Mr. Krieger.
The new business, just to enlighten myself, I think I asked this question of the administration before. I don't understand, why are we putting share roads on streets next to the bike paths that we currently have in there? I don't understand that. Like I was particularly talking my ward, like on Hopkins. I mean, we've got all these bike paths on Hopkins and bike roads, if you will, and then we got now all of a sudden they can use, do they use both or they can use either, or?
Yeah, if I can. So, Mr. Krieger, yes, they can. Short answer is yes, they're at liberty to use both.
That is, why are moving forward, since we have all these share roads now, will we stop doing bike paths in the city of Manor? Because why would we go through that expense if we're going to allow the bikers to use the road?
Well, I think share roads are, first of all, share roads are an acknowledgement that bikers have an equal opportunity to utilize the roadways and really always have. I think it's as much an awareness issue as anything else, where we can provide a safer pathway for bikers through the use of bike lanes or multi-purpose pathways. We've done that. As council's aware, with the needs in our road infrastructure, we have generally held off on putting in new bike lanes or multi-purpose paths until we've had grant opportunities to do that. So we're always on the lookout for that, and we had a small one approved off of Headlands Road not too long ago, but those grant opportunities have been few and far between here in recent years. So I think this was one opportunity for us to enhance our roadway network in an inexpensive manner, and also to provide some level of awareness to enhance the safety of those utilizing our roadways for biking purposes. I know there's a resident expert on your council here.
Still back to but if you say enhance the safety, the bike paths, back lanes enhance the safety, but if they're running right along the side of the road, I don't understand why we would make both available.
Can I answer that?
Mr. Kirchner.
Because they're not bike paths. They're multi-purpose paths. If you
misread the sign.
I don't know what the sign says, but those paths along, say that go along Veterans Park there that are paved, you can't ride a bike 20 miles an hour. The road bikes that have come down Hopkins are doing 20, sometimes 25 miles an hour. There's people walking their kids, there's people walking, there's roots that are coming up. I mean, they're not conducive to a number of different bikes, so they're not bike paths. Bike lanes are different. You got bike lanes along Lakeshore Boulevard that bikes use. But in the city of Manor, people can, if they want to ride recreationally and they want to stroll along, they can ride on the sidewalk, they can ride on the multi-purpose paths. But in the streets, which by law, bikes are permitted, it's just an additional layer of safety, not only for the bikes to have the sharrows, but for cars. Cars see the emblems in the road, they see that, they know that there's a possibility there might be a bike taking the lane. Now, there could be an obstruction on the right side, or be a storm sewer, it could be anything. So they have the right to take the lane for the purpose of safety. So that's, the bike, there is no really bike path. Everything is, it's a multi-purpose path. Everybody uses it. So in that respect, you have bike lanes and you have roads the bikes use a lot.
What happens if I want to walk in a bike lane?
You're not permitted.
Where do I got to walk?
Walk on this, The law says, and bike lanes is not pedestrian access. It's telling you what the law is. Well, bike lane is,
Well, I'm saying if somebody's walking down the bike path, okay, as
What are the
opposed to,
difference?
you know,
multi-purpose path.
Yeah,
You
You're
can
talking
call
a
it
lane
bike
on the
path all
side
you
of the
want,
road,
it's
like a
not
house.
bike path.
yeah, bike lane, I understand. That's a part of the lane, right along the side of the road. But then you're saying those are
Purpose path. By
that's the first time
definition.
I've even heard that it's multi-purpose.
Well, if you're walking on it, it's not a bike path then, right? It's for everybody to use. If someone's pushing their,
You said I keep answer this question, you can't walk on a bike lane,
right,
but the bike path.
there is no bike path. It's a multi-purpose path. A bike path
Let me
is
ask
what
you a
you
question.
see at
Why do we
Veterans.
have, it says bike path, number one. Number two,
I don't see where
it's got a stop sign. Got stop signs at the intersection, you know? So if you got stop signs, I'm sure that's
So
not
you
for-
stop.
Okay, all right.
You're allowed to have a bike on there. On a bike.
Who takes
on a
precedence if people are walking on it? Who's got the right of way then?
You're supposed to acknowledge that you're passing someone if they're on a multi-purpose path.
Just don't walk in a bike lane.
That's the law. I can't help you there. You're in the public right of way when you're in a bike lane. You're like walking in the street. The bike path is in the public right of way. You're walking in the street if you're walking up. A bike by law is permitted in the street. Move to adjourn.
We good? No, hold on. Hey, I have something for Mr. Zeman. Is Kathy Mitchell still around, or did she flick us off?
I gotta get you on a bike, that's all.
Put this off.
I want to run this by Joe. I just want to make sure we keep an eye on Johnny Cake Ridge Road, Phase 1 and 2, the permanent road connection. I want to make sure that language is kept up. It's a condition. I think they're on their 29th or 30th house at this time. And then things start, in the conditions, things start progressing with the road. And we have a
So you're
bond.
talking about, I think it's Ridgewood Greens or
Yes,
something?
Ridgewood Greens,
subdivision?
yes.
Yes.
We put a condition in with a bond.
Yeah, so the requirement is, yeah, listen, we do have Ms. Mitchell. Kathy, did you want to comment on that, respond to that
Yes.
question?
Thank you,
Well,
Kathy.
I don't have the exact language in front of me, but the requirement is because this came up about a month ago. They have within 1 year, once that 30th house is built, to construct that road. It's not
Okay.
at the time of, so there is a little bit of time after that 30th house is constructed that the road has to go in, but they have to have it in within a year from the 30th house being constructed.
Okay, but did the language say no more permits after the 30th? Or are they keep permitting as they're building the road? Is that how this is supposed to read?
My recollection is the road has to be connected.
Yeah, me too, Ken. I'm just concerned, Kathy, just make sure we keep an eye on that, and that they're on their 29th house, from what I understand. And we have a condition in here that they need to put that road in with utilities and all. So I just want to make sure we get that road.
I do believe that both engineering and planning are both departments are watching it closely. It does not restrict us from issuing further permits. The clock starts ticking after the 30th house gets constructed.
And then we have a 6-month extension, but all this is supposed to come back to the administration. The
If
6
they
month.
need something, yeah, if they needed a further extension, yes.
Right. Okay. That's all I have. Thanks, Kath.
Yep.
Is that any other new business?
Adjourn.
Persons before
This meeting is adjourned.
council. You adjourn.